Friends, Excellencies, Magnificencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor for me to welcome you in the Patriotic Hall, and it's maybe some symbolical issue that we are at the Patriotic Hall of the Czech University for three items. One, on the walls there are 6 busts of the patriots of the Czech lands and the Czech movements in the beginning of the 19th century. The second, it is a portrait of the professor of Czech University and one of the 3 founders of the Czechoslovakia, Professor Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk, and our associate professor Edvard Beneš, and our alumni Rastislav Maria Štefánik, which will be the 3 founders of Czechoslovakia in the 1918. And finally, the carpet, it shows the beauties of the Czech lands in the center of the Prague, to going to the north, east, south, and west around our country. I am very pleased that among the participants are not only the representatives of 4 respected university associations and other partners from foreign universities, but also our other distinguished guests from the Ministry of Education, Czech Republic, and later will be presented former President of European Commission, José Manuel Barroso, and representative of European Commission, Vanessa de Bies-Santon, and other representatives of Czech institutions. Allow me to introduce for us well-known person, representative the University Association, Professor Ludovic Tilly from Poitiers University, the chair of the executive board of the Coimbra Group, Professor Hartmut Mayer from Oxford University, director of Europeum, Professor Kurt Deketeler, head of FLERU coordination, and last but not least, Professor Luciano Sasso from La Sapienza University Rome, president of UNICA. And we are very proud to host such a distinguished institution to be part of the vivid life focusing on research, education, and circle of the universities. Many of you were presented here 2.5 years ago when in 2016 we were together celebrating the 700 years anniversary of the birth of the founder of Czech University, Charles IV, and the Rector Conference was entitled Legacy of Charles IV, and the main focus of the conference was academic freedom. In his speech, Professor Yves Friekinger, Rector of University of Geneva, said that academic freedom is the root of academic association, academic science, education, and arts. It is our basis which we need for our work and our responsibility for not only academic community, but also for the society. Prague Declaration, which was signed by the main representatives of the Coimbra Group, UNICA, Chair of European Academic Council, me and the Ministry of Education, Youth and Sport, Czech Republic, and supported by 77 universities across the world during the conference by stress at the end. In today's globalized world, the role of universities has lost none of its point significance. Our world has changed dramatically since the era of Charles IV, but the critical mind of a free man and free exchange of opinion were and will be the most powerful tools and most precious value in our civilization. We cannot solve any of today's global problems without science and education. The importance of basic and applied research is also growing while we are flooded with information of all kinds, and it is becoming more and more difficult to understand the world today. Quite often people tend to fall under the impression that universal values which our modern society was for centuries built upon the still stand upon values such as humanism, tolerance, and openness, all essential part of democracy, exist no more. And that is possible to relativize almost anything. Universities are here to remind them that it is not so that such values still exist and are worth fighting for. What was changed in the 2.5 years? Is situation still alarming and requiring our attention? We are afraid that yes. The Czech Republic and Slovakia are celebrating 100 years anniversary of an establishment of the common state in 1918. Czechoslovakia, highly industrialized and socially stratified, served as example of a democratic state in the Central Europe. When we were shaping today's conference program, we were examining the legacy of this anniversary for today's world, and most of all for universities. We agreed that we are living now in a relatively disturbed world with many new influences. Above all, we are facing increasing intolerance. Many populists are looking for simple solutions, black and white, and universities are here as well at the times of Charles IV to guard democracy, humanism, and wisdom. How to reach this target? Yes, we have to be responsible for the development of our university, our academia, our society as well. There were two first presidents of Czechoslovakia, Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk and Edvard Beneš, who took responsibility for the state and also for society. They played a crucial role in establishing a new political and economic order, but mostly also ethical norms. I am really pleased to welcome more than 50 foreign participants from 27 countries from Europe, United States and Asia, and 44 universities and our Czech representatives from state administration and representative of the Presidium of Czech Rectors Conference. Let us talk about our role and consider our responsibilities. Europe, our societies and our universities are especially for young generation deserve it. I believe that we will spend together fruitful 2 days and we will sharing the experience, and if we will put the strengths and ideas together, I believe that the future world and future 100 years behind us will be also in the democratic, humanistic Europe. Thank you very much. And now we will starting with our program, and Madam Vera Jourová, the Commissioner for Justice, Consumer and Gender Equality, cannot be presented today to other working arrangement, but she prepared for us an opening video message. And please.
Dear distinguished guests, I am delighted to address you today to celebrate 100 years of Czechoslovakia and to reflect on the legacy of democracy, humanism and responsibility. What does this important anniversary mean to us today? It reminds us of the founding ideals of the Czechoslovak Republic: freedom, justice, democracy and humanism. To Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk, the first Czechoslovak president, democracy did not mean ruling, but working to secure justice. And justice, according to him, is the mathematics of humanity. Masaryk also reminded us that states maintain themselves by the ideals from which they were born. These ideals were invoked also by the accession of the Czech Republic to the European Union in 2004. The common values that bind us together in the EU are human dignity, freedom in all its forms, democracy, and the rule of law. The place where you are gathered today is very symbolic. Universities stand for far more than for education and knowledge. They have always been the nourishing ground for fostering sound values among its students and in broader society. Charles University, which is one of the oldest universities in Europe, has always played this role. Today, however, we see that many of the values are not understood in the same way. From my view as a European Commissioner, I believe that we need to stand for these values together. We need a strong and united Europe, which continues to be a union of values, of freedom, democracy, equality, and the rule of law. I wish you fruitful discussions and look forward to learning from the insights they will bring.
Thank you for this video message, and now I would like to ask a few words to Lenka Rovnát, the Vice Rector for European Affairs of our university and the key person preparing this event. Lenka.
Thank you. Magnificencies, dear colleagues, dear friends, welcome to Prague. Welcome to Charles University. This is so great to see so many familiar faces and so many colleagues and friends. I would like to express our great gratitude for a wonderful cooperation during the preparation of the Rectors' Conference devoted to the 100th anniversary of the birth of Czechoslovakia, the democratic state in the heart of Europe. Charles University is a very proud member of all these networks, of course with the exception of LERU, where we are the member of LERU CE7, but the cooperation is really great and we are very grateful for that. Many of you attended the previous conference remembering 700th anniversary of the birth of the founder Charles IV. In both cases, we concentrated on the legacy of democracy and humanism. During the previous conference, we spoke about innovation, as it was the Czech king and the Holy Roman Empire emperor who brought to the country many, for that time, new innovations. Today and tomorrow, we are going to stress responsibility, and hopefully we will take some responsibility ourselves. The two founding fathers, Masaryk and Edvard Beneš, as was said, were professors of Charles University who took responsibility for society as such and replaced classrooms for political arena. We are now grateful to them not only for establishing an independent, multinational democratic state, but also for a value-added, deep humanism democracy, and as was stressed by the Commissioner Věra Jourová, also ethics and morality, the values which are becoming rather rare. This is the legacy worth following. I am confident to assure you that Charles University, cooperating with all 4 university networks, are following this path. Coimbra Group, Europeum, LERU, and Unica create a unique community working closely together to promote research and innovation, education, and to fulfill their irreplaceable role in the society. Being responsible thus means fulfilling the legacy of Czechoslovakia and her founding fathers, as well as democratic Europe. I wish you all a successful conference and a lot of enthusiasm and strength to face further challenges. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Lenka, for your kind words. And now we're starting through the program to introducing and welcoming speech for the representatives of 4 university alliances and networks. And I would like to ask Professor Luciano Sasso, President of Unica, for the opening speech.
Good afternoon to everyone, Rector Zima, authorities, colleagues and friends, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure for me to be here today for this very interesting conference organized to celebrate the 100th anniversary of Czechoslovakia. And I would like to thank very much Rector Zima for having decided to involve the Unica network of the university from the capitals of Europe, together with other important university networks such as Coimbra Group, Europeum and LERU. Unica is a strong network of 49 universities from 37 European countries, very much engaged in the internationalization of education, research and innovation, by sharing good practices in agreement with our motto, sharing, learning, adding value. The theme of this conference is of great relevance, and I'm looking forward to listening to the presentation and the following discussions. In particular, I'm very interested in the role of European universities in the so-called post-truth society. I think that we have to admit that we are not doing enough to make sure that all citizens of our societies have the necessary information to take positions on all different issues and challenges. In the last few years, we observed the rise of populism in many countries, including Italy, which in my opinion is based more on perceptions rather than on real facts. People feel that Brussels, as some people say when referring to the European Union, has too much power and wants to control our lives, while on the contrary, we know that the European Union is not an integrated federal country like the USA, but just an international organization sharing only about 1% of the GDP of its members, while in the USA, the federal budget is about 20% of the GDP. Indeed, we should consider the possibility of sharing more in order to have more common resources for useful activities. The European Union is a great project which guaranteed 70 years of peace after centuries of wars and bloodshed, and we are currently enjoying the highest level of freedom in history, even if we don't seem to appreciate it enough. Another reason for the rise of populism is related to the phenomenon of migrations. Data from the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees indicate that in the world there are about 68.5 million forcibly displaced people who leave home because home does not allow them to stay for different reasons, including wars, violence, dictatorships, famines, climate changes. We Europeans should know very well how painful it can be to leave home, because there are examples of that in all our families. In the 1920s, the peak of Italian immigration to Argentina was about 800,000 people per year. And after the Second World War, more than 200,000 Italians were emigrating to Belgium every year. In the last few years, people in Europe felt invaded by migrants. But even in 2015, when, with great generosity, Germany welcomed more than 1 million people, and Sweden about 180,000 people, the number of migrants reaching Europe was just a very small percentage of the total. To migrate is a characteristic of our species, Homo sapiens, which had the courage to move out of Africa about 65,000 years ago to avoid the extinctions, probably due to a dramatic climate change at that time. Continue to move to all regions of the planet. So the solution is not to close harbors or airports, but to manage the phenomenon in an appropriate way, by welcoming correctly the migrants and at the same time reducing the areas of wars and conflict in the world, and investing more in cooperation for development in the countries from which most of the migrants are coming from. In this regard, it is of note that most European countries spend between 1 and 2% of their GDP for military expenses, and only between 0.1 and 0.4 for cooperation for development. These topics are complex, and I don't want to take too much of your time at this moment, but I would like to say that I feel that it is our responsibility to debate these issues at our universities with our students, to ensure that all our graduates, besides being knowledgeable in their specific subjects, will also be citizens conscious of what is happening in our societies and in the world, thus making wise, which in Latin is said sapiens, like Homo sapiens, and like Sapienza University also, wise political choices based on real facts rather than perceptions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luciano, for your words, and also some areas where we have the responsibility for the future world. And now I would like to ask Professor Ludovic Tilly, from Poitiers University, the chair of the Coimbra Group.
Director of Charles University, Professor Thomas Zuma, dear rectors and vice-rectors, dear professors, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to be back here in this beautiful and historical building of Charles University, where we celebrated a few months ago its 670th anniversary. Today, we are celebrating another important anniversary in the history of Europe, the first century of Czechoslovakia and Czech Republic. When I was asked to provide a title to my speech, I was actually preparing my presentation for the 30th anniversary of the Magna Carta Universitatum that was held in Salamanca last month. It was as obvious to me that the title should be Coimbra Group and Charles University, same commitment to society in a changing world. Let's first look to the past. Universities, and among them Coimbra Group universities, including Charles University, have been among the most stable institutions over ages. Many European universities have been created during the medieval period, well before most European states. Interestingly, universities survived political crises and even shaped European societies and European identity. In particular, Charles University, as it was recalled, has had a crucial role in its country and more widely in Europe. For centuries, Charles University has been the intellectual crucible that shaped the spirit of the citizens of Prague and continues to play this role today more than ever. Now looking at the present. In a rapidly changing world, the principles of the Magna Carta Universitatum have never been so important. These principles are: the university is an autonomous institution transcending geographical and political frontiers. The university is a trustee of humanism tradition. The university serves society and spreads culture and knowledge. The university rejects intolerance and is open to dialogue. And finally, research and teaching are inseparable, must be morally and intellectually independent, and remain under the seal of freedom. So we must not be shy and speak up about our values. Altogether, we must promote collegiality, integrity, equality, and we must further engage with society. Now, what about the future? 2019 will be a crucial year in the European history. First, we will see the all-important elections for a new European Parliament in May 2019 and the appointment of a new European Commission for the following 5 years. Second, discussions will continue and hopefully decisions will be taken on the two major European programs, Horizon Europe and Erasmus+. And third, and I just heard actually that the call is now out today, we will see the launch of the pilot phase of the already well-advertised European University Alliances, which will embody an ambitious but necessary political vision for an inclusive and democratic Europe. For each of these important events, universities and academic communities have an important role to play. Our tradition of dialogue and critical thinking should be used to actively fight intolerance, obscurantism, and their pernicious practices, such as the spread of fake news and public opinion manipulation. In this fight, the Coimbra Group, but also the other associations, will continue to stand and advocate for open and inclusive European higher education and research areas. To finish, let me quote the Prague Declaration that indeed was signed here in May 2016. Our world has changed dramatically since the era of Charles IV, but the critical mind of free men and women and the free exchange of opinions were, are, and will be the most powerful tool and the most precious value in our civilization. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ludovic, for your words, and also maybe which our forces to be preparing to discuss with the society the critical issues which will be the elections the next year in the European land. And now I would like to ask Professor Hartmut Meyer from Oxford University, the director of Europeum, for his words.
Yeah, thank you, Rector Zima, Professor Lenker, rectors, vice rectors. As my previous speakers, I'm extremely delighted to be back in Prague. We are a small consortium, the Europeum, 14 universities, and we are focusing on the student experience through spring schools, summer schools, bursaries, workshops, and so on. So we are less of an advocacy organization and more of an organization for student experience. But I share all the concerns that my previous speakers expressed about where we are in Europe. And let me take the opportunity to reflect a little bit about the theme of the conference, which is responsibility for civil society. I'm also the director of the European Studies Center, and I wrote a book on responsible Europe. I don't want to give you a lecture, Political Theory 101, but there is a principle, which is the capacity principle. If you can swim and you see a drowning child, you have to jump in and save the child. And I very much believe that when it comes to the common European space, I see a drowning child. And I think the rectors and vice rectors in this room should realize that we have the capacity to jump in and save that child. And being from an organization where the headquarters is in Oxford, you can imagine I have Brexit for breakfast, Brexit for lunch, and Brexit for dinner. I don't want to repeat all the little politicking that is going on, but what I want to try to emphasize is that we need to preserve that common European research space that we have built over time, because it's much easier to destroy things than to protect and expand. And we are all in an age group here where we experienced the end of the Cold War. I was a student at the Free University of Berlin, and after the wall came down, one of the first things we did is inviting the colleagues from the other side of the city and immediately establish these links that are so important to sustain democracy, dialogue, and research, and so on. But also, I hear occasionally colleagues saying, oh, the Brits are out, now we can have more of the pot, we can exclude them, we can have more for us, better research, and so on. And my appeal is, don't be narrow-minded and short-sighted. If we lose that common European space, we're losing a lot for European societies. And you just have to go outside Europe to see what kind of innovation is happening in China, is happening in America, and so on. If we believe that little benefits, cost-benefit analysis, can I get a bit more out of the pot, is not good enough. We need to stick together and foster these ties that we have built over time. So I think it's our joint, and that's the theme of the conference, responsibility as rectors and vice rectors to stick together and lobby wherever we can in our political context, but also in the European context, to preserve what we have built over time. No better place than Charles University, one of our wonderful members. We are used to excellent, not only grand conferences, but the working relationship that we enjoy with Thomas and Lenka, but also the support staff and the academics we treasure very, very much. And as I said, it's a delight for me to be here, and we have a common responsibility. Thank you very much.
Hartmut, thank you for your kind words, and also, as we mentioned also in before, that we should protect the European education and research era, which you have we are a small and nice continent in the world, but we should be together, and that will be more powerful. And last but not least, I would like to ask the Kurt Deketeler, Secretary General of LERU.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thomas, Lenka, thank you very much for the invitation. And of course, LERU, the League of European Research Universities, also would like to congratulate the university and the Republic with this fantastic anniversary. I would say that every opportunity to celebrate democracy, humanism, and responsibility must be taken, and certainly if you can celebrate 100 years of it. LERU is very pleased to be back here, and I'm very glad also to see that our former chair, Bert van der Zwaan, is here, and several rectors from LERU universities are present here today. It's clear that we have developed over the past few years an excellent collaboration with Charles University. Charles, which is part of what Lenka already mentioned, the CE7, the Central Europe 7 group that LERU has created in collaboration with 7 universities here in Central Europe: Tartu, Warsaw, Ljubljana, Lorand, Belgrade, Zagreb, and Charles University in Prague. So this has been going very well, and I think that we certainly, from both sides, want to continue that. Let me dwell a little bit, during a few minutes, I would say, on a number of issues which have already been mentioned. And I just want to come back to the fact that, of course, democracy, humanism, and responsibility, well, it's clear that also these values are still endangered in different parts of Europe even today. And obviously, we can refer to what is happening for the moment in Italy, what is happening in the UK, what is happening in Poland and Hungary, where we see that problematic political leadership is leading to a number of undesired consequences. People being in the lead of a country which clearly have not learned the lessons of the past and which are taking a number of risks with regard to their own country and with regard to the European Union. And unfortunately, I see almost on a daily basis now, although we are 2018, that this kind of politics is now also contaminating, I would say, EU research and innovation policy. And Hartmut already hinted at that in his intervention. We see that in the present negotiations which are going on in the European Parliament with regard to the new framework program for research and innovation which is developed, the Horizon Europe program, we see, very unfortunate, for the first time, a kind of, not a kind of, it's really labeled like that, we see a Europe first approach by several MEPs, and which are really making a point that money, research, innovation, education, IP, and things like that strictly have to be kept within the European boundaries which are for them the EU 27. We see now all kinds of ideas coming up, like keeping new associate members to the framework program out. You know that we are looking into the possibility to take countries like the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand on board as associate members to the framework program in the future. And of course also the UK, if Brexit would really happen. Personally, I'm still convinced that Brexit is not going to happen, so be reassured about that. But if it would happen, we of course do everything from the side of LERU, but also the other networks, to make sure that the UK can become an associate partner to the framework program. And I regret very much to see now that in the European Parliament there's a whole kind of movement, a whole wave of people saying, well, we have to keep them out. If they do not want to be a member anymore, we have to avoid that they can participate in the framework program, that they can participate in the ERC, that they can participate in Marie Curie and things like that. So it's clear that this is a very regrettable development, and we hope that we still can stop that, but I'm not so optimistic that this is going to work out well. We see for all kinds of other issues that there is a plea for geographical balancing of funding. We see a plea for the EU having to finance the research divide which is existing in Europe. So the worrying development with regard to Horizon Europe in the European Parliament, which by excellence would have to be this defender of democracy, humanism, responsibility, we see that the excellence of research, innovation and education in Europe is risking to be undermined by this new approach towards the framework program. If we don't take care, the framework program will become a kind of regional support program instead of a research program. And having so many rectors and vice rectors in the room today, I certainly want to take this opportunity to call upon you and to ask that you approach your national competent ministers, prime ministers, ministers of finance, ministers for research, and try to explain that this Europe first approach is not going to be helpful. Not for the EU, not for the member states, not for specific political parties in the member states or in the European Parliament. And I think that universities and their leadership are probably one of the only remaining important and relevant societal forces which are able to oppose this development. As universities, we have the task to speak up and to lead society in the direction and making sure that we get there in the direction of democracy, humanism, and responsibility. And so I'm very much afraid of the fact that if we don't take action at EU level, that things for the first time, I would say, certainly in our own specific policy field, could go wrong. And so from the side of LERU, of course, we support what was said by the Commissioner, that we need a strong, united Europe, and that indeed we have to continue to support this common European research and education space. Thank you very much.
Of course, thank you very much for your words, focusing on also the one highlighted items, that is the new calls for the near future, how will be supported in the Europe, the research, and as I said, the Europe, not the European Union, with or without some members, or if it's inside or outside. We are now at the end of these welcoming speeches, and the first part will be chairing by Lenka Rovna, which we are looking, the first part will be looking to the history of the 100 years of the Czechoslovakia, and also the representative of the and founders of our state, and I will pass the chair to Lenka Rovna. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I will be now very happy to invite two speakers who are my dear colleagues from Charles University. The first one, Professor Martin Kovář. He is Vice Rector for Public Affairs at Charles University. He is Professor of History at the Faculty of Arts. Martin is specializing especially in modern history of England and its empire, political and cultural history of Europe in the 20th century. He published many books dealing with Britain, but also with Professor Barta. They are publishing many books and, for instance, Collapse and Regeneration. So we hope that you will not be describing the collapse of the EU. I think that we have to prevent that, as was said in the panel. And Martin will be speaking about 10 years of Czechoslovakia in Europe and the world. So the floor is yours.
Dear Lenka, Excellencies, Magnificencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends. It's my pleasure to give a speech today titled 100 Years of Czechoslovakia and the Czech Republic in Europe and in the world. Let us then look together at a century and Czech statehood, an extremely dramatic century full of breakpoints, times of upsurge and decline, times of joy and euphoria on the one hand, and sorrow and suffering on the other. Let us look together at the fate of a small nation in Central Europe. Let us look at the fate of a nation that had lost its sovereignty many centuries ago and then strived in vain for a long time to regain it. Let us look at the fate of a nation that eventually succeeded during the Great War and with the significant help of the Entente powers in regaining its independence. It's a thrilling story featuring powerful, exceptional personalities such as Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk, Edvard Beneš, Milan Rastislav Štefánik, and their close friends who, with unshakable will and dedication, made their dream come true, embodied in a particular result, an independent state. Hard as they may have tried, it couldn't have been done by themselves. The establishment of the First Czechoslovak Republic required much more than efforts of several individuals. It was the favorable international political circumstances, and above all, the help of the great powers. Without the sympathy and support of the American President Woodrow Wilson, British Prime Minister David Lloyd George, and French Prime Minister Georges Clemenceau, Czechoslovakia would never, I repeat, never seen the light of day. Therefore, it's not exaggerated at all to call the new state the child of great powers. With respect to this experience, it was only logical that throughout the interwar period, the foreign policy, security, and general position of the young state was connected, very closely connected with the Western powers, France above all. It was Paris that was the most frequent destination for Czechoslovak politicians. It was Paris that was much admired and loved by Czech and Slovak artists and writers. And it was French that was by large the most frequent foreign language, whose acquisition was one of the crucial prerequisites for entering the high circles, including politics. Alas, at the end of the prosperous roaring 20s, virtually no one could have anticipated the blow that we were supposed to suffer from the sweet, beloved France. The 1930s brought about a major economic crisis, and the international political position of Czechoslovakia witnessed a number of extremely unfavorable changes. To the west of our borders in Germany, the National Socialist regime headed by Adolf Hitler came to power in January 1933. One of its most significant and important goals was nothing less than the destruction of the much hated Czechoslovak Republic, an island of democracy and liberal values in Central Europe, which provided asylum to many political refugees from Nazism, politicians, journalists, writers, etc. Many of them, for example, Mann brothers, valued this help greatly and never forgot about it. On the other hand, some other neighboring countries, namely Poland and Hungary, escalated their territorial claims with ever increasing aggressiveness. To cut a long story short, dark clouds started to gather over the Czechoslovak Republic. In fact, as the famous historian Robert Kvaček aptly noted, it was overcast all over Europe in the late of 1930s. And then the year 1938 brought catastrophe and nationwide trauma, lasting in many respects to this day. Adolf Hitler and leader of the Italian fascists Benito Mussolini, along with the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, French Prime Minister Edouard Daladier, passed a merciless verdict in Munich over a small Central European state, which meant the end of its existence. Hitler thus took the next step in his crusade to conquer Europe, assisted by Benito Mussolini, and the British washed their hands of the demolition of a country far away they knew nothing about, sacrificing it in a foolish hope for peace. France, the closest and until then most faithful ally of Czechoslovakia, as I said, sweet and beloved France, adopted the same approach. Shame and nothing but shame. These words resonated all over Prague those days. The Czech poet František Halas wrote, "The treason bell tolls over and over. Whose hands are swinging its rope? Sweet Marianne, proud cliffs of Dover, our beloved ones robing us of hope." The spring of 1939 marked the beginning of the dark ages of the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. 6 years of Nazi occupation, 6 years of arrests, interrogations, and executions followed. 6 years of enslavement and humiliation. Yet, these were also years of extraordinary heroism. One of the most powerful Nazi officers, Reinhard Heydrich, came to Prague as the acting Reichsprotector to destroy the Czech nation and found his own death here. It was the Czech nation that killed him. While the heroes of the Anthropoid operation fell in combat, their brave action sent a clear message that resonated all over Europe, all over the world, that the Czechs and Slovaks hadn't accepted the Nazi occupation and that they would fight for freedom. The Czechs and Slovak Air Force pilots fought the Nazis equally as brave over the Channel of La Manche and in spectacular Battle of Britain, as did the soldiers on the Eastern Front within the Soviet-led army. After 6 years of war, after 6 years of occupation, much desired victory was fought in the spring of 1945. Never had the peace and freedom been sweeter. However, a new set of clouds, equally as infernal as the preceding one, was forming on the eastern horizon. The communist Soviet Union longed for the expansion and violent occupation of a large part of Central and Southeast Europe, similarly to Nazi Germany. In February 1948, Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin reached his goal with the help of the local minions led by Klement Gottwald. In a brief period of time, the communist coup d'etat made Czechoslovakia an enslaved country. Both actual and suspected opponents of the communist regime ended up in prisons and concentration camps. Many of them were sentenced to death, including a Charles University alumni, Dr. Kamila Horáková. An iron curtain descended along the western border of Czechoslovakia. This time of the buried alive lasted for more than a decade. It was not until the mid-60s when the local political situation witnessed meek and gradual liberalization and first attempts from Soviet sphere of influence. The Prague Spring of 1968. So much hope, so much joy of freedom that seems so close, you could toss a biscuit. The 21st August 1968 destroyed all the hopes we cherished. The Soviet army, aided by the troops of other Soviet bloc countries, have mercilessly halted at the dream of socialism with a human face. Perhaps a naive, but essentially noble attempt to live happily and freely in a country with the word socialist in its name. Soldiers with red stars on their caps raped the most beautiful city in Central Europe, just like the Nazis had done less than 30 years before them. Clenched fists and tears in people's eyes, sadness and hopelessness, despair beyond imagination. For the next 20 years, during the period of so-called normalization, Czechoslovakia became, in fact, just a province of the Soviet despotism. 20 long years, total dependence of Prague on Moscow. 20-year-long slavery under the yoke of Soviet imperialism. 20-year-long period of shame. And then November came. The 17th November 1989. On this day, the Czech and Slovak university students commemorated the 50th anniversary of the cruel suppression of the student demonstration by the Nazi invaders, and in addition, they added an overwhelming criticism of the current communist rulers. The regime's response was swift. As the Nazis in 1939, the communists used the armed force against the students in November 1989. As in 1939, students' blood was spilled in Prague again. The outcomes have been known to all of us. Similar to its neighboring countries, communism collapsed as house of cards also in Czechoslovakia. It was not achieved only by the efforts of the Czech and Slovak students and leaders of dissident movement, members of Charter 77, headed by Václav Havel. First and foremost, it was a result of favorable international political situation, the ongoing economic decline of the Soviet Union, and the increasing pressure from Western powers, especially the United States of America. We were lucky again, as we had been back in 1918. To quote Seneca, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. The Czechs and Slovaks were prepared, which is why dreams came true once again. Václav Havel became president of Czechoslovakia in December 1989. In the following year, people elected a new parliament in a free election, resulting in a democratic government, and the Soviet occupation army left the country. We have walked a long way since then. In spite of all the problems and difficulties we are struggling with every day, our lives have been a successful story for almost 30 years now. We are a free parliamentary democracy. We are a member state of the European Union and member of North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Also, in terms of economy, our country has been never as successful in the past as it is today. And yet, it is no easy times we live in. The European Union, including our country, has to cope with the Brexit. It means with the departure of Great Britain, which is, let us face it, a great loss for both sides. In addition to that, the European community has been finding it rather difficult to define its future, as well as its own identity, in the past few years. Democracy is facing many challenges around the world, whether it's the terrorism of self-proclaimed Islamic State or authoritarian leaders heading the states allied along the so-called axis of evil. In Europe, we are struggling with massive migration from Africa and the Middle East, and with the rise of populism. To live in a free society has never been easy indeed. However, With the experience we have in Czechoslovakia, in the Czech Republic, we can appreciate the hard-won liberties. We know what a life without freedom is. We perfectly know what we could lose if we lost freedom again. We appreciate our allies and try to fulfill our commitments, even though we see certain things differently and our opinions may differ dramatically from time to time. The majority of us, however, knows that we will have to find common ground with our allies and friends, because our freedom, our security, and our future will be at stake without our strong anchor in the West. We know that. We know that. Our 100-year-long history has taught us many a lesson to make us realize that. Charles University, our alma mater, where we are meeting today, has been an integral part of this century-old dramatic story. Its students and alumni have been amongst the leading Czechoslovak and Czech politicians and statesmen, heroes of anti-Nazi and anti-communist resistance, the protagonists of hopeful Prague Spring and the Velvet Revolution. This is a history we can be proud of. This is a tradition that binds us all. Thank you.
Martin, thank you very much. You were right. It was emotional, like the history of this country. So now let me introduce a dear colleague and hopefully a dear friend as well, even so that I am sometimes tough to you, as you told me. Professor Petr Pithart is professor of law, political scientist, politician. He was one of the first signatories of Charter 77. He was after 1989, when the dream came through, as Martin mentioned, became the Prime Minister of Czech Republic and then the President of the Senate, awarded by many awards, including the Order of the White Double Cross of Slovakia. So, and Petr Pithart will be speaking about university, first president, and the state, and his colleague, Professor Pekař. So please.
Thank you, Lenka. Dear colleagues, I will talk about two great men, and only one of them was a founder of Czechoslovakia. The second one was his opponent. Instead of grand speeches celebrating the centenary of what is now merely the Czech state, today I will tell you the story of two great men from the beginning of the celebrated period. For me, both of them, but above all, the story of their disputes and ultimately their mutual regard for one another are evidence of the nobility, of the greatness of the first Czechoslovak Republic, and also a celebration of this ancient university. Both were professor of Charles University. I'm sorry, I am not a professor. The first was elected president 4 times. The second, who was 20 years Masaryk's junior, was, towards the end of life, persuaded to stand against Masaryk, who was originally a professor of of Sociology for the office of President. That was in 1934. Professor of History rejected the offer. Both men died within a short period of time in the same year, 1937. The first of them to pass away was Pekaš. They were quite different. The former was afraid of the disintegration of the monarchy, and the latter made the maximum amount of effort to bring it about. The first was loyal to the Emperor Francis Joseph I and spoke highly of him at the morning gathering at this university following his death. The other was in exile at the time, and an Austrian arrest warrant had been issued for him. The same monarch would have signed the death sentence for the latter if he had not died earlier, just as he wished to do for Masaryk's colleagues in the resistant movement at home, like for Kramář and Rašín. But where is the promised story? Masaryk came to Prague from the University of Vienna in 1982. There, he was given a position as a poorly paid private reader. He eked out a living in poor conditions with his 2 children. In 1992, Charles University, as a Czech university, separated from German Ferdinand Charles University. Masaryk had a choice. He considered a professorship at the newly established University of Bukovina, and he had offers from elsewhere, including America. He did not have a good opinion about Prague, but from there, too, he had received an invitation with an offer of an early professorship. Masaryk decided to go to Prague, in Bohemia, not only for salary. At the time, he still wrote and spoke Czech poorly, but he had been involved in Czech student life in Vienna. He was all the more attracted by Czech history. So here are some of important episodes of Czech history from Masaryk points of view. He was impressed by Hussitism and the Czech Brethren. He himself was a seeker of religion, originally as a child devoted Catholic, and then also under the influence of his American wife, a Unitarian, he inclined towards Protestantism. At the time, he tried to discover what he called the meaning of Czech history. Hussitism and Czech Brethren were followed by the national revival, all of which resulted in the idea of humanism. This entitles us to an independent existence, either as a part of federalized monarchy or, as he understood after the beginning of the war, as an independent state. Masaryk and it is very important, became a Czech by choice, moral and political choice, not by birth or language. He was born on the Moravian-Slovak border. His mother was German, his father a Slovak. His Czechness is all the more valuable because of this. His professorship in Prague turned out to be a chimera. Masaryk brought liberal attitudes to Prague, which his colleagues at first did not at all like. He took the liberty of criticizing them at their public lectures. He fought a lone battle against Czech anti-Semitism, and in particular with the general belief in the authenticity of the allegedly ancient manuscripts that were believed to prove both our cultural and our civilizing, especially legal, superiority to the Germans here. He was a substantive, contentious polemicist, so perhaps he could say concisely that if he needed one university, we needed two. It is one of the Masaryk's most accurate witticism, thought one that was meant with deadly seriousness. For this reason, a university was founded in Brno after the establishment of the state. For a polemicist like Masaryk, one university was a conceptual nonsense, kind of like one political party, political system. He tried to enter politics, but without success. He was too much of an individual, contentious, too dominant. So he devoted himself to Czech history for a few years and published 4 books in short order, more of a program guide than real history. His university colleague, historian Joseph Pekař, was a regional patriot in the romantic mood, a political conservative, but primarily a historian with a gift from God, a great tongue, all the meticulousness of the historian in his little finger. Compared to him, Masaryk was a dilettante without a clear methodology, an enthusiastic amateur, the author of slogans for protest banners. Pekař was relentless in his criticism of Masaryk's books and smashed his work, that is, the meaningful and uplifting concept of Czech history, to the miseriness. He wrote cautiously that Masaryk's Czech history should rather be called My Relatives in Czech History. According to Pekař, the national revival did not involve Hasitism or Czech brethren. Czech are not a nation of John Hus. It did not matter to Masaryk in the slightest. In his dispute with Pekař, others than historians defended him. He knew that what he wanted was something quite different. Rather than a historian, he was more a preacher, a nurturer of the nation, a propagandist, a leader. Nonetheless, the debate between Masaryk and Pekař developed into a very useful, years-long debate between historians, philosophers, and writers and publicists about the meaning of Czech history. In Masaryk's words, the Czech question. Before the Prague Spring, it was reopened by Milan Kundera in 1967. In a way, the disputes continues to this day. Masaryk achieved what he had resolved with the aid of Beneš, Stefanik, and the legions in Russia. The powers of the Entente came to agree at the last minute with the breakup of Austria-Hungary, which they had not planned initially. As a patriot, Pekař eventually accepted the creation of the state with joy, although he made no secret of the fact that he would probably have rejoiced even more at the federalization of the empire. He feared a fragmented Central Europe and feared nationalist passions, especially in the expansionism of the Germans. He did not believe in Masaryk and Beneš's idea of Czechoslovakia as a kind of Switzerland. The two men between whom a massive gulf opened due to their pre-war dispute and stances during the war, did not meet after the war, even though the loud polemics passed away. They watched each other closely. Who was right? The historical truth was on the side of Pekař, and the truth that was useful to the war on the side of Masaryk. The legions, which at one time controlled almost all Russia along the main route through Siberia to Vladivostok, adopted the ideology of the Hussites and Czech brethren, with its simplifying slogans. They had it on their banners and in the names of their units. Masaryk insisted on having his way. When he returned from exile, he declared that the Taborites, the most radical Hussites, were our program. That is the program for the newly created Czechoslovakia. He said this in the then still Catholic Bohemia, not to mention Moravia and Slovakia. Pekař was by temperament, by cast of mind, and not by birth, a Catholic with an admiration for the Baroque, and he continued to lecture on the history of Czech countryside, the Czech nobility and the Czech struggles for state rights. It means the rights of the historic country within the empire. His students loved him. And behold, his students included Masaryk's eldest daughter, for the last time. he was already seriously ill. Pécase died on 5th of March 1935. Masaryk had the following words written on the ribbon on his wreath. Professor Pécase, I often remember you and our context. You were a good man. The story ends. Two men who faced each other before the First World War, the first of them barely respecting the other, who pursued different goals and who might well faced one another as opponents in an election, managed to respect and honor one another, even if from a distance. I am convinced that this was also because it took place not in the parliament, not only in the newspapers, but on the grounds of the university, Charles University. At one time, Pécase was even rector of this university. Before the war, Masaryk was both accepted and non-accepted by the university. He only received the promised professorship for which he had left Vienna 11 years after, 11 years later, when Masaryk already knew that he wanted to be and would be a politician. Yet both great men always identified with the university, because the university gave them research and political freedom. And they, moreover, were noble-minded in general and also to each other. Two great men, in a sense, the greatest men of this country. The university grounds enabled fruitful encounters between two completely different concepts of nation and state. And from this encounter, an independent Czechoslovakia born. Also, due to the existence and polemic encounter of two great men, Masaryk and Pécase, on these grounds, I am proud to say that when the establishment of the state, when the First Republic is mentioned, one must also think of Charles University. I am proud of the academic grounds here on which different conceptions of future state encountered one another, but on which mainly the noble-mindedness and the best men of the First Czechoslovak Republic was cultivated. It obliged us to this day. There is not clear even today for what one can be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So you saw how complicated Czechoslovak history was and still is. Unfortunately, we used all time. So if you have any questions, please remember them for the next panel. And I have several announcements. So first, I would like to invite you for a family photo. Those who remember from last Rectors Conference, and for those who don't know, it is going to be taken at Big Aula, just behind the corner. So please, we will then continue there, and then we will have a coffee break. Then the second announcement is dealing with the journal you got, university forum, and then you have a small box. And in the box there are postcards. So you are very welcomed, and write a postcard to your close ones, university, family members. And then there is a yellow box, so you can throw it there and we will put a stamp and send it to the right destination. So you are very much encouraged to do that. Then tonight's dinner is going to be at a quite nice restaurant, Manes, which is not just by university, it is a nice walk. Those who want to take a walk, unfortunately the weather is getting much better, I see some blue sky, then you are welcomed to come at 6 p.m. To the main entrance of Carolinum, and then there will be a guide taking you to the restaurant and showing you a bit around. So let us go then, please, now to take a picture, and then we will come here.
Please, we will continue the first panel, Legacy of Democracy. Dear distinguished guests, magnificencies, dear colleagues. It includes 4 contributions by Professor Louis Richardson, who is Vice Chancellor of University of Oxford, Lixels, who is Rector of Catholic University Leuven, Professor Karol Michieta, Rector Comenius University in Bratislava, and Bert van der Zwaan, Rector Magnificus in Utrecht University in the Netherlands. First contribution will be delivered by Vice Chancellor of the University of Oxford, Louis Richardson. The theme will be Universities in Troubled World. Louis Richardson is Vice Chancellor of the University of Oxford, political sciences by training. She was previously the Principal and Vice Chancellor of the University of St. Andrews and also spent 20 years on the faculty of Harvard University, latterly as Executive Dean of the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study. Professor Richardson's books, What Terrorists Want, Understanding the Enemy, Containing the Truth, precipitated a seismic shift in approaches to the study and tackling of terrorism. She serves on a number of not-for-profit boards, including the Carnegie Corporation of New York and the Booker Prize Foundation. Please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. As we heard earlier, Charles University was already ancient when the Czechoslovak Republic was founded at the end of the First World War. But the university had been at the heart of the Czech national movement for centuries, though there was not much cause for celebration in October 1918. It's good to remind ourselves that, bad as things may sometimes seem, our predecessors have encountered, and for the most part survived, far worse. 100 years ago, Oxford, along with every other university in Europe, mourned the death of thousands of its staff, students, and alumni. The war's impact, especially in Central Europe, was far from over, even though the armistice would be signed 2 weeks later. Yet within a few months of Oxford's post-war reopening, a university committee was set up to send assistance to the universities of Central Europe, starting in April 1920. Despite the horrors of war and the more subtle impact of political repression, the idea of an international academic community has proven remarkably resilient. The University of Oxford is proud of our links with the Charles University. In the darkest days of the Second World War, Oxford enabled Czechoslovak students to continue their studies and hosted degree ceremonies for students from the Charles and other Czech universities. Arrangements were made for scholars from several universities to come to Oxford during and after the war. It was also a great privilege to award the honorary degree of DCL to the President of the Czechoslovak Republic, Edvard Beneš, in 1940. President Beneš wrote to my predecessor, Vice-Chancellor Sir David Ross, on the 21st of February, 1945, as follows. In a few days' time, I shall have left London for Czechoslovakia. None of us can tell when the Czechoslovak universities will be reopened. Prague, Brno, and Bratislava are still in enemy hands. While my countrymen will, I am sure, lose no time in restoring the educational facilities of Czechoslovakia, they know well enough that it will take time to assemble the teaching staffs again, to restock the despoiled libraries, and to secure the necessary equipment and scientific apparatus. I believe, however, that this difficult phase will be temporary, and that soon the scholars of Europe will travel freely from one university town to another in Europe. Oxford men, as you know, will always be welcome in Prague. I can speak from personal assurance in saying that Oxford women are very welcome in Prague too. But this is only one of many troubles this ancient university has faced over the centuries. Jan Hus began his campaign for reform of the Catholic Church by reading from his pulpit as rector of the Charles University in 1406. a document brought to him by two Bohemian former Oxford students, bearing the seal of the University of Oxford, which praised the reformist doctrines of John Wycliffe. Huss's name was adopted for the Jan Hus Educational Foundation, which was set up in Oxford to support the independent study of philosophy under the communist regime, with Western and Czech academics meeting in living room seminars in Prague and Brno throughout the 1980s. Some of the foremost figures in modern philosophy took part in these seminars at great personal risk. Jacques Derrida was accused of drug smuggling by the communist authorities, and Anthony Kenny, then master of Balliol College, was detained and questioned. These and many others serve as examples of the courage to question and defy unjust authority for which a university should stand. Václav Havel expressed the Czech Republic's gratitude to the Hus Foundation in 1998, when he became the third Czech president to be awarded an honorary degree from my university. International Students' Day, the 17th of November, commemorates the closure of the Czech universities by the Nazis in 1939. 50 years later to the day, student protests began the Velvet Revolution and ushered in the end of the communist regime which had brutally repressed academic freedom. Today, November 17th, is a commemoration not only of the courage shown by students in universities, but of the value we all place on being an international, diverse, and mutually supportive communities. We in Britain worry that the vote to leave the EU will hamper the smooth functioning of this relationship, which has flourished in recent years with the free movement of students and staff between our universities. Brexit is not just a problem for British universities, but for the universities of Europe. Many international research projects are under threat. To name just one, there's been a very exciting collaboration on economic modelling for climate change policy between Oxford and the Charles University over the past 3 years, funded by an EU grant to enable academic exchanges between the two universities. I have never known the academics of Britain to be so united on anything as they are in opposition to Brexit, and yet the majority in the referendum voted for it. The best predictor of a vote for Brexit was not age, race, or class, but degree of educational attainment. 73% of those who voted for Brexit did not have a university education. 75% of those who voted to remain did. There is an important lesson for us here. As we heard this morning, we should not be so removed from the communities in which we live and work. So troubled times are undeniably with us again, even if they are frankly benign when compared to that of times past. The particular trouble that I'd like to address today has been mentioned already. It is the rise of populism and illiberalism, and I see the vote for Brexit in that context. Populism across this continent and the US has manifested itself in a suspicion of outsiders, a rejection of pluralism, a repudiation of expertise, and often of universities, which are perceived as bastions of privilege. Populists hold that only one group is legitimate, the people, however defined. Cass Mudd argues that the populist view of their mission is essentially moral. The distinction between the people and the elite is not wealth, but values. They therefore maintain that they alone represent the people. This explains how the term populism can be ascribed to such diverse operatives as the Dutch Geert Wilders, a secular nationalist who demands a crackdown on Islam in defense of gay rights, as well as Jaroslaw Kaczynski, a religious nationalist who pushed for a Catholic takeover of Poland's institutions from the elite secular liberals, and the anarcho-socialists in Spain's Podemos. Generally, according to Mueller, populists define the people as those who agree with them. As an example of this, he cites Nigel Farage's assertion that Britain's vote to leave the EU was a victory for real people, as if the 48% of the British people who voted to remain were not real people. Mueller believes populists to be defined by their claim that they alone represent the people and all others are illegitimate. Mueller argues that populists believe that they only lose when real people have not had a chance to speak. Hence the popularity of conspiracy theorists amongst these groups. In the last US presidential election, candidate Trump repeatedly claimed that the election was being rigged by his opponent. It turns out, of course, that he may have been right. It may indeed have been rigged, but on his behalf and by the Russians. Curiously, even when populists enter government, they still have somebody to blame and manage to convey themselves as victims. Right-wing Erdogan in Turkey blames Gulen and his domestic supporters. Left-wing Hugo Chavez in Venezuela blame foreign enemies. Others take aim at the institutions of the state, in which they perceive as countervailing powers. Ominously, both Erdogan in Turkey and Orban in Hungary have taken aim at universities, seeing them as countervailing sources of pluralism and perceiving in their autonomy a threat to state monopoly. Orban's efforts to shut down the Central European University in Bucharest, which was created precisely to support the development of liberal democratic values in the region, was surpassed only by Erdogan's wholesale attack on academics and universities in the wake of the recent coup attempt. Votes for illiberal policies and parties are often explained as the revenge of those losing out to globalization. Certainly, we've all stood by and watched the gap between rich and poor in our societies widen. At a global level, hunger, poverty, illiteracy, and disease are at an all-time low. But that is of little consolation to voters who see their jobs outsourced to another country or see factory jobs taken over by lower-paid immigrants. Disdain for experts has gone hand in hand with populism. For me, and I expect many others, the most memorable line of the Brexit referendum campaign was that expressed by Michael Gove, educated at my university, I'm sorry, but he said, "We have had enough of experts." The corrosive effect on democracies of this distrust in experts has long been foreseen. The risk is that we find ourselves in a vicious cycle. Voters have disengaged from politics and are not informing themselves adequately to make reasoned judgments. In the absence of an informed citizenship, technocrats and experts become dominant. Trust breaks down between voters and experts. Experts retreat from the debate and talk only to one another. I believe that universities must not retreat, that we have a crucial role to play in bridging this gap. So what are we to do, universities to do in this situation? In short, I believe that universities should respond by standing our ground and doing what we do best, pushing at the frontiers of knowledge and educating the next generation. But in doing so, we must be more engaged, more willing to persuade, and remain irrevocably true to our principles. When Václav Havel came to Oxford to receive an honorary doctorate 20 years ago, he said, "An intellectual should, as a matter of principle, be welcome in politics. Never before has politics had a greater need for people who recognize and understand and in one way or another experience the universal interconnections. For the first time in the history of the human race, all people of this planet live in one global interconnected civilization that is threatened by serious, equally interconnected dangers. When, if not in such a situation, does politics call for people who are aware of their responsibility for the world as a whole?" But politics today appear dominated by people who resist this internationalist sentiment and prefer to turn inward. My own university accepted its first international student in the year 1190 and has been receiving international students and considers itself an international community ever since. Universities are premised on the belief that truth is an aspiration, not a possession. Inside a university, there is no such thing as an alternate fact. Facts become facts when they are supported by evidence. But populism feeds on misinformation and innuendo. Truth and opinion become deliberately blurred. And what can universities do to counter this? The first thing I believe we can do is teach. Teach our students respect for evidence. Help them to distinguish between opinion and information, between information and knowledge, and between knowledge and wisdom. Equipped in this way, we hope they will enter the world beyond the university and become advocates for evidence-based reason, policy, and decision-making. Universities are a place of community, of belonging, of diversity, and of tolerance, a place that embraces rather than fears difference. Our role must be to export these values to the world through our students. We are also a community that celebrates freedom of speech, so we must be prepared to defend the expression of all legal speech. and be prepared especially to defend speech we find objectionable. We must not, however, be shy about challenging speech with which we disagree. Universities must become fierce and objective guardians of knowledge and allow open access to that knowledge. We must not be shy about challenging falsehood coming from any direction. The ability to do so is correlated to the public's faith in our willingness to be objective and fair-minded. We must preserve our autonomy and be prepared to speak truth to power. We must, above all, have uncompromising standards of scholarship. Many of our great universities make legitimate claim to being global institutions, but we're also civic and national ones too. We must be engaged in our local community, sharing the benefits of our resources, our libraries and museums, ensuring that our local communities see us as their university, and ensuring that they recognize the contributions we make to the local community. Universities serve as drivers of social mobility, as engines of the economy, and as guardians of our culture, and above all, as generators of new ideas. We must ensure that our communities know this. If we continue to ensure that our local communities understand and value our role, we will continue to play our part as foundations of our democratic societies. More tangibly, our universities contribute to individual, local, and national wealth. Male graduates in the UK earn 28% more than non-graduates. Female graduates earn 53% more. Our universities are critical to our local and national economies. My university alone adds £2.3 billion to the local economy, £7 billion to the global economy every year. Universities across Britain contribute 2.8% of British GDP and support 3% of all jobs. I expect many members of the public do not know this. We have a very strong economic case to make, but it is by no means the only case, or even, in my view, the most important one. What price can be put on a poem? What value for money in the exploration of the human condition? What return on investment in the inculcation of empathy, experienced in seeing the world through another's eyes? We should not therefore confine ourselves to an economic argument. In fact, throughout the history of science, most of the great discoveries, which ultimately proved to have enormous societal benefit, were made by scientists driven only by their own curiosity, rather than by a desire to be useful. Michael Faraday, who is most responsible for electricity, had no interest in its use. Marconi is credited with the radio, but it was Clerk Maxwell and Heinrich Hertz who made it possible without considering its applicability. As Einstein, a former lecturer at this university, said, "Imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited to all we now know and understand, while imagination embraces the entire world and all there ever will be to know and understand. It is imperative that we persuade the public that institutions like ours have a responsibility to cultivate curiosity in our students and protect curiosity-driven research by our academics. We must not only be prepared to speak, we must figure out a way to be heard, not just by members of the elite, but by society at large. Writing 2,000 years ago, almost 2,000 years ago, Tacitus said, "Truth is confirmed by inspection and delay, falsehood by haste and uncertainty." We must make the case for inspection and delay, not as an excuse for prevarication, but as an essential requirement of meaningful and reliable research. In these troubled times, universities cannot be satisfied with being guardians of knowledge. We must become advocates for knowledge, and yes, for expertise. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting. Second contribution has Professor Lixels. Lixels is rector of Catholic University of Leuven since May 2017. In his capacity as rector, he is a member of the Rectors' Assembly of the Leagues of European Research Universities, the Rectors' Advisory Group of the Coimbra Group, the Board of Directors of Venice International University, the Board of the Flemish Inter-University Council, and the board of directors of Zurich Business School. Lixel is also actively involved in labor market policy research and policy advice. He serves on the Belgian High Council for Employment as a representative of the Federal Minister of Employment and is director of the Center of Expertise in Labor Market Monitoring, which advises the Flemish government on labor policies. Please.
Ladies and gentlemen, for the third year in a row now, KU Leuven tops the so-called Reuters ranking of the most innovative universities in Europe. And in the recently published global Reuters ranking, here on the slide, we are currently ranked 7th. Not bad for a 6 centuries old lady, I would say. Yeah. Situated in the tiny region of Flanders, a very small, open economy. And I can hear you thinking, well, it's no more than a ranking. And I understand and even share your skepticism here. However, in my opinion, it's much more than just a coincidental outcome of an ill-considered comparison between universities. Looking at the indicators, the parameters used in this Reuters ranking, which are admittedly very rough, but at the same time quite adequate, I think we can learn a lot from how successful universities are today in transforming science and in affecting the global economy and actually in affecting the free market economy, which I was asked to reflect on in my short address here in Prague. I think in part we achieved this high position, this top position in the Reuters ranking, by producing a high volume of influential, impactful inventions. And I depicted some of the products of the free market economy that can be, let's say, linked to basic research in KU Leuven on the right side of the slide. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I know it's not very polite to start my speech here in Prague at this prestigious Charles University with statements about the achievements of KU Leuven. My apologies for that. However, there is a reason why I started my speech like this. Simply because today it is allowed to do that as a rector. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, you would immediately have been accused of lack of independence with regard to the free market. You would have been criticized for a purely instrumental view on universities as an economic lever. You would have been blamed for bowing to the capitalist pressure of the free market economy. That all has changed. Today, science is much more closely linked with the market than it was a few decades ago. Universities once self-consciously held themselves apart from the free market, from the economic world, and that has changed dramatically. A university euro, and that is not only the case in Leuven, that is the case in many of the universities represented here today, a university euro is now far more likely to come from the private economy, from industry, as it was in the 70s or in the 80s. It also has become far more common for faculty, for professors to also be entrepreneurs. We have around 1,500 professors in Leuven. 1,000 of them have some activity in the tech transfer office. That's quite new if you position that in a long-term historic perspective. Patenting of university inventions was until recently a practice that was very rare, in some countries even banned. And today it has become routine. And I think along the same lines, universities themselves have changed quite radically. They have become complex, I think, among the most complicated, large-scale universities that you can find on this planet. If I again would take the example of Leuven, but it is not doing nothing. We currently have a budget, an annual budget of approximately, let's say, somewhere around 2 billion euro. We cater to 57,000 students. We employ over 22,000 employees. We pull about 150 million euro from the private market each year. We have a very, very complicated hospital activity within that university. We have campuses in 10 different cities, from Bruges to Leuven, from Antwerp to Brussels. So being able to have good insight in business economics, principles of business economics, some understanding of principles of finance and auditing, accounting, some dose of good management experience are, I think, today key competencies that we derive from the private market, but key competencies for a rector, for a provost, for a president, not only in Leuven, but in many places and many universities. So today, and that's my second section in my speech, today science is tied to the market, the free market economy, in many different ways. Think of the creation of science parks, the growth of technology transfer offices, patenting, research collaboration, spin-offs. And I see two main reasons, two main drivers behind this move of academic science toward the market. People often believe that this was the initiative of the university, simply looking for more money, more resources. You know this expression, universities will raise all the money they can and spend all the money they raise without an upper limit. And there is some truth in that expression. But I do believe that the main driver behind this interconnection and growing interconnection between universities and the private market, the private economy, is actually government. It was government, especially in the 80s and the 90s, that encouraged universities to treat academic science as an economically valuable product. And the second is that new idea that has been spread in modern society, namely that discovery and innovation serve as engine, the word was already mentioned by the previous speaker, an engine of economic growth and competitiveness. And some people deplore that evolution. I understand that. But let's be honest, universities have clearly benefited from this change, from this evolution. Yeah? Because the consensus that new knowledge contributes to competitiveness has pushed universities and the whole university sector to the forefront in the public, in the policy debate. And that's, I think, a change that also comes with its advantages. So that idea in itself, the idea of the engine, the university as an engine, is not new. But I do believe that until the, let's say, mid-1990s, that same political idea had very little political impact or impact in our societies. So because before science was primarily seen as an economic resource, today there is a strong belief that universities can serve as an economic engine, and that's a completely different perspective. So across ideological lines, most leading politicians clearly voice that the primary aim of scientific discovery is to power not only economic prosperity, but also energy supply, private health, public safety, military security, and I can continue for a while. And today, and that's where I see the risks coming, we are yet another step further down the road. The global leadership of the West is challenged, as you all know, by emerging nations that intend to compete by making massive investments in education and research. I can refer to China, I can refer to India, and to many other countries. So around the world, national leaders understand that university research is a chief catalyst for economic adaptability, and there comes this difficult word, a weapon in the fight for economic dominance. And if you're not convinced, I can recommend Mahbubani's short booklet on Has the West Lost It? And the shifting balance from the West to the Chinese, especially the Asian economies, and the very important role that science and scientific investments in science play in that change. Oops, that's going too fast. Third, very short comment that I would like to make. The whole shift from science as a resource to science as an engine, on which I already commented, is certainly not embraced by everyone. Some people even state that some universities have become enterprises themselves, that the 21st century university is not simply interwoven with the free market economy, but has become simply an actor, an agent in that free market economy. And the fear is that that will cause this, there comes this expression, the slow death of the university as we know it. Yeah. And then listening to colleagues who voice that fear, the main comments that I hear are, first of all, well, this interconnection with the free market will distort our research agendas. Second, it will create an increasing amount of conflicts of interest. And third, we see a level of intellectual property protection that is detrimental to the progress of science and the open progress of science. And I do understand those risks. I do understand the risks. But I do not count myself among the critics. And I clearly dissociate myself from those colleagues who see the university only as kind of a sanctuary, a place for free economic debate that is detached from the surrounding socioeconomic fabric. I belong to the proponents of this change from science as a resource to science as an engine, because I see the benefits of that change. Benefits not only for the university, but also for, and there's the link, our democracies. Think of the role of the market in getting science into broader use. Very important. Think of the contribution of university-based inventions in overall socioeconomic development, not only economic, but socio-economic development. Think of the importance of being able today of rewarding scientists whose work has a real impact. And I didn't need this slide, but the next one. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of the multiversity. I'm not the one that came up with that beautiful word of the multiversity. It was actually Clark Kerr, who was more than 50 years ago the president of the University of California system. And he said, well, what we call a university is actually a collection of communities, very diverse communities with diverging objectives that are held together by one single name and hopefully also by one single mission statement. And I like that concept of multiversity because it signals that the internal complexity of our universities is such that we are indeed able to combine, on the one hand, the role of being the engine of economic development and at the same time a place for open academic debate and free debate. Two final comments. First of all, a comment on maybe addressing those who believe, and my predecessor in my current job was one of them, who believe that universities are becoming kind of a private institution, very close to private companies, that they are like corporations. I don't believe that. I see, and I can recommend William Massey's book on re-engineering the university. I see three very distinguishing characteristics that make universities very, very different from private companies. And the first, and I will comment very briefly on each of the three, the first is a very simple fact that universities, in the end, are non-profit institutions. Of course, I know also in Leuven that we accumulate surpluses. We all do. But all the surpluses are reinvested in our universities and not given away to shareholders. That's an enormously important difference with private institutions. You could say that we are more mission-driven, while private companies are rather profit-driven. We are, to use a very old dichotomy, closer to the top of the Acropolis, while private companies are playing on the Agora. A second, I think, very important distinction, and I will not go into detail, but we all recognize, I think, the importance of cross-subsidization in our universities. A dirty word in the private economy, but tremendously important in universities. Think of a very simple example, a university with the Faculty of Engineering, and let's take another example in the Humanities, Faculty of Arts, Faculty of Philosophy. Yeah, let's take philosophy. And of course, what we all see is that the Faculty of Engineering is very close to the market and is attracting a lot of resources from that market. Demand is high, so the positive margin is enormous. And then there is philosophy, not attracting even sufficient students to compensate for the losses. And then in a for-profit logic, we would immediately close down philosophy. In a not-for-profit university logic, we will maintain philosophy. We will maintain it for its intrinsic value. That's part of being mission-driven. And we actually, in Leuven, decided earlier this year to increase the level of cross-subsidization from science and technologies towards the humanities. You can imagine how pleasant the conversations with the Dean of Engineering are. Yeah? Part of my very exciting life as a rector. The third distinguishing characteristic is, in my opinion, the quality of our personnel, the quality of our staff. I've been walking around in so many private companies. I've been Dean of the Faculty of Economics and Business for 9 years, so I know that part of the Agora. And all these private companies are really trying to figure out how they can instill important qualities like dedication and engagement and commitment in their frontline employees. In most universities I know, those qualities simply come with the territory. They are there. A level of empowerment, a level of engagement, dedication that is, I think, in part related to the internal level of democracy within our institutions. And let's try to maintain and preserve that as a very important quality. Let me conclude, ladies and gentlemen, with my final slide. I think my position, what I try to explain, is that my position with regard to the relationship between the university on the one hand and the free market economy on the other hand is, I think, nuanced, balanced. I hope so. I again refer to Massey's book. He states, well, universities need to be mission-oriented and mission-driven, but at the same time market-smart. And I think that combination is really the future for our universities and allows to really deeply engage in the triple helix concept without being dominated by the private sector or by government. But I do see three challenges, and that's where I want to conclude. And I think they can be maybe part of the debate later on or the discussions that we will have over dinner tonight. The first concern is the shortfall of funding for blue sky research. I'm quite familiar with the regional economic development literature, and what you learn from that literature is that over the previous 2-3 decades, and those are estimates, but around 60 to 75% of all the economic growth in Western societies is driven by technological change, which originated from research, basic research in universities and other public research institutes. That number, 60 to 75%, underscores that universities are a very, very important pipeline. And governments, and that's what we see also in Belgium, naturally want to broaden that pipeline even further. They understand that it is an engine. That's good. But they, in my opinion, do not always understand the mechanisms of the pipeline and how important blue sky research is in feeding that pipeline. What I see in most European societies, but also in the European funding schemes, is a worrying push for increased commercialization of university research. And that in itself is not so dramatic. That's my first point. as long as at the same time enough resources are invested in blue sky research. That's the balance we need. A second challenge, the declining attention for the humanities. We all understand that discoveries in science and technology have a much more tangible impact on our daily lives. It's more visible. I'm coming from the social and behavioral sciences. Let me simply observe that the broad public simply underestimate the impact of the humanities and social and behavioral sciences on our daily lives. Just to give a few examples, scholars translating great authors, linguists identifying the fundamental structure of language, not that unimportant. Yeah. Philosophers reflecting on causality, psychologists, cognitive dissonance, criminologists scrutinizing eyewitness testimony and how we use that in trials. Let's not forget the humanities in this debate on science and technology in our entrepreneurial universities. And then a last comment, accessibility. I don't know what's the case in your country, but in Belgium, people think that the US universities are the best. What the public forgets is that the United States have around 5,000 institutions of higher education, and that only 108 to 115, a small group, is really considered to be reckoned among the research-intensive academic institutions, 108 on a total of 5,000. So when Americans say we have the best universities, they do not mean on average our universities are the best. No, of the best universities, we have quite a few. That's actually what they want to say. And if you look at the Ivy League universities, the total number of undergraduate students is around 65,000, 70,000. The total capacity, ladies and gentlemen, of the Allianz Arena, the football stadium in Munich, is 75,000. So there's not even one full football stadium of students enjoying the direct impact through education of all these impressive inventions and breakthroughs realized in the Ivy Leagues. And that's where I want to conclude. Let's, in this debate on universities and the free market, not reduce universities to R&D factories. I think it was in Crow's book that he said, well, let's call them RD&E institutions, research, development, and education. Also distinguished by their capacity, and that's important to emphasize, to provide broad accessibility. Knowledge only becomes useful through access and through transmitting it across generations. Thank you.
Thank you also. University as space for independent discussion. It's a theme of third contribution, Professor Karol Michieta. Karol Michieta completed his studies in botany at the Faculty of Natural Sciences at Comenius University in Bratislava in 1976. In 1995, he became the head of the Department of Biology, and in 1998 he habilitated as an associated professor in the same field. In 2007 he became professor in general ecology and the ecology of individuals and populations. He is a member of several Slovak and international professional societies, expert committees, scientific boards, and other organizations, and he has participated in many domestic and international research projects. From December 2002 to January 2011, he was the chairman of the Academic Senate of Comenius University, and since February 2011, he has been the university's rector. Please.
Thank you. Dear Chairman, dear academic community, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. Thank you for the invitation and for the great choice of academic topic. In my opinion, free speech and independent discussion are the very essence of university existence. The spirit of free university scholarship triumphed almost 8 centuries ago, and the attempt by Bishop Tempierre of Paris to ban the study and interpretation of Aristotle at university was a failure. The privileges which Casimir the Great mentioned in the 1364 University of Krakow Charter were essentially the same for all medieval universities and in many ways remained relevant for modern ones. He mentioned the protection of people who have relationships to the university and adequacy of student rental accommodation, the inclusive disciplinary subordination of student to rector, an example, and the arrest of the student in coordination with the rector office, student election, the provision of professors' salaries from the profits of the salt mine near Krakow, which was one of the most lucrative sources of royal income, and the possibility of teaching at any other school for those who receive a master or doctor degree. The key concept behind these privileges were protection and freedom. Medieval society was hierarchical. Freedom was mainly related to one's social origin and property status. The rules brought an unprecedented degree of democracy and egalitarianism. However, they were privileges for a new elite which was determined not by social origin or property status, but rather by education. In the king's eyes, the scholars and wise people were worthy of protection and special privileges. The exception at exclusive status was enjoyed by university scholars from the Middle Ages until practically in the end of 20th century. Not even the Humboldtian model of higher education changed this. On the contrary, it emphasized for the freedom of the academic environment. In a way, it was respected, albeit in a deformed way, in the totalitarian regimes of the 20th century. However, today, only part of medieval and Humboldtian free academic ideal is left. All over Europe, that which was not deformed by authoritarian regimes and been visited by the current ruthlessness of short-sighted policies, dogmatic economies, and soulless bureaucracies. That is why we, civic academici, have persevered so much to hang on to what little remains of these form privileges, the freedom of scientific research and the enthusiasm of its results, the freedom of choice of academic degrees, and the similarly archaic and pompous academic ceremonies. Universities have always been a place where wisdom has found institutional frameworks for developing programs for improving individuals and education, them so that they contribute to the advancement of society as a whole. A commonly organized written makes the university environment a sort of collegium musicum, which once characteristically referred to association and professional musicians at the German universities. However, this metaphor of a musical ensemble only expresses one aspect for university status in the world, which is made distinct by their claim to autonomy. This claim would never have this legitimately justified if universities had not accepted their task of contributing to the culture, advancement, and society. A university is a place where the process of educating young people and developing scientific knowledge takes place within an autonomous institution governed by its own rules. The development of science is where universities find the social and cultural justification. At the founding of the University of Berlin, Wilhelm von Humboldt acknowledged the university as a scientific institution with the right to govern by its own rules and without any limitation or predetermined purpose. At the same time, he committed to provide scientific knowledge for the spiritual and moral education of the nations. In Humboldt's project, the free development of scientific knowledge is linked to education, which allows a university to connect with the nations. At the heart of the university efforts should be the apotheosis of reason and search for truth resulting from internal motivation and the curiosity of the research, and the not emphasis and stimulation external demands, financial benefits, and pressures from the external political or business environment. It is necessary to have a public awareness of the beneficial effects of such a perspective. The quality of life and development of society are determined by levels of science, research, education, and innovation. Today I should emphasize that over the last 100 years, nothing has had a great influence on the development of human spirit, culture, industry, agriculture, and health than free research and scientific knowledge motivated by curiosity and the spirit in inquiry. It is still today, so today, the living condition of humanity and of individuals have changed of the past century. The needs of manufacturing, agriculture, transport, healthcare, and even interpretation and recreation present new challenges for research and development. The university must continue to be a research and educational institution where the current level of knowledge and research must be the foundation and teaching. A large part of research advancing humanity and enabling it to survey is undertaken at the best universities in the world. They are the best because of their top-level research and education. Steven Weinberg, winner of the Nobel Prizes in Physics, the author of best-selling book The First 3 Minutes, which dealt with the origin of our universe. He said that without research universities, the United States would have to survive on soybean farming and guiding tourists around Great Canyon. A real scientist and motivated by curiosity, the unexplained phenomena of the world, in that inscrutable feeling of joy when the beauty of the mystery changes into knowledge of a scientific law. Real scientists keep a wonderful feature from childhood throughout their whole lives, their heavy ability to really enjoy something. They remain curious children of inquiry and can also enjoy things which are not practical. Basic research is motivated by curiosity, and it is often very important not to engage in practical application. Sometimes it may be necessary to wait longer than the results of applied research, but the benefits of results derived from basic research last longer and are disproportionately great. Basic research set the place of technological progress and in the long run also brings great financial gains. The humanization, commercialization, and purely technological advancement will not bring us a better world. Universities and institutions then can want to, and I believe we play a cardinal role in reflecting on and eliminating these undesirable trends. Society faces challenges and tasks which universities are looking for and can find answers to. Academics and scientists have a lot of information which they think over and analyze, and then come up with an effective solution. Universities are unique places where different ways of thinking meet in the free academic spirit. The closing act of Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream include these words by Theseus: "The best in this kind are but shadows, and the worst are no worse of imagination amend than." Dear colleagues, it is not about us and our universities, colleges, and visions. I am convinced that we are supposed to dream that our imagination will continue to come to our aid. I wish us all and our universities living, creative, and free dreams and hope. Thank you.
Thank you. The fourth contribution of this panel, called Legacy of Democracy, will be delivered by Professor Bert van der Zwaan. The theme will be Universities Speakers of Truth. Bert van der Zwaan is Professor of Biogeology at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. Trained as a paleontologist, his main research interest involved the impact of climate change on the extinction of marine faunas. Early in his career, he initiated many interdisciplinary research programs and later was director of the Darwin Center for Biogeology. He was first dean of the Faculty of Geosciences and then from 2010-2018 Rector Magnificus of Utrecht University. Please.
Thank you for this kind introduction and for the opportunity to speak here. It's a pleasure to be here. I do realize that the final speaker has the duty to deliver a light and entertaining talk. But I'm afraid it's not going to be. I have this very serious subject that is about truth, and I think that we have 15 minutes of hard work ahead of us. But I'll try to make it as easy as possible. And first off, because it's about truth, I'm not Rector Magnificus anymore, so this label here is wrong, so that you know that I plan to speak the truth and nothing but the truth. More specifically, I want to talk about the question, should universities search for facts or for the truth? And probably your immediate reaction is the truth, of course. A university is about the truth. But is that so? In the next 15 minutes, I will explore this question and already say now that the outcome is not so hopeful. My conclusion, and I hope that we have a lot of debate on that, is that today the collective truth, a truth which is shared widely in society, is fragmenting, and that the modern university is not doing much to prevent that. But let's first try to capture the problem in a nutshell, and for that I will give you a quote from Bolton and Lucas in their Leary paper 2008, which they took from Newman's book The Idea of University, published in 1852. And the quote gives some idea about their and Newman's idealized view of the university. It says, "A university is a place where the students come from every quarter for every kind of knowledge, in which the intellect may safely range and speculate. It's a place where inquiry is pushed forward, discovery is perfected and verified, and error exposed by the collision of mind with mind and knowledge with knowledge. It's all about the intellectual process. Truth is not even mentioned." And to some extent that's typical of that time, but maybe also our time. And it's also reflected in a quote 75 years earlier from the German philosopher Gottlob Lessing. In 1778, quite a long time ago, he stated that if God were to offer me the truth in one hand and the search for truth in the other, I would choose the latter. And often left out of this famous quote, by the way, is the final sentence, "Father, I will take this one," and he means the hand with the search for the truth. "The pure truth is for you alone," indicating the deep belief that only God could know the truth. And I think that this line of quotes via Lessing and Newman to Bolton and Lucas shows that the university is not necessarily about the truth. The university left the question, what is truth, very long to theology and later to philosophy. And that has never been a problem, certainly not over the past 50 years, because the university and society were of the same mind. Technology and science almost formed an ideology in itself, leading to a rationalistic approach in which only facts counted. Facts don't lie, was the slogan. However, since a couple of years, we see a shift in the public debate. The notion of truth, as supported by objective facts, is gradually replaced by a worldview in which one can select the facts that are convenient and supportive, ignoring the less convenient ones. Over the past couple of years, this phenomenon of the so-called post-fact or post-truth society has become rapidly more pervasive. In its talk, I will develop the thesis that the university is one of the last institutions that can and should make truth-seeking a core value and a trademark in a society that is increasingly moving away from what I would like to call the collective truth. How come that the university is not about the truth, whereas we are all thinking that truth is the cornerstone of our being? Part of the answer lies in the 800 years of history of the university. When it came into existence, the university was mostly delivering knowledge of practical use and was very dependent on the powers that be. This even went so far that, as in order to please church or ruler, the old university was prepared to change the observation immediately and bend theory instantly, almost without any concept of truth. But since then, universities went through a number of fundamental changes, and many of them pertain to the independency of the university. I need to think about my slides as well, so that it is very difficult for a man to do two things simultaneously. To fundamental changes, and many of them pertain to the independency of the university, of lords and the church. The center point of the origin of the modern university lies without doubt in the totally novel realization of Galileo Galilei that the doctrines of the church regarding many natural phenomena had been wrong, and that facts should determine the truth. In his famous letter of 1615 to the Grand Duchess Christine of Tuscany, belonging to the Medici family, which paid and protected Galileo and wanted him to tell what he should do, he wrote, "Therefore, let these men begin to apply to an examination of the argument of Copernicus and others, leaving condemnation of the doctrine as erroneous and heretical to the proper authorities." And with that he meant not the clergy, but scientists. For the first time, he wrote that science should decide about science. And he concludes, and that's the second line there, that it is not in the power of any created being to make things true or false, for this belonged to their own nature and to the facts. In 1633, he retracted these statements in the famous process the Inquisition started for heresy. But immediately after that, Galileo took care that his Dialogo was published in the Netherlands. And in 1638, he wrote a discourse considered by Albert Einstein to be the foundation of modern physics. In this monumental work, Galileo developed the ideas which were taken further by Descartes, Spinoza and later Newton. From that time on, observation, fact and truth became fundamentally connected to constitute the foundation of science. And this was further pushed by scientists during the Enlightenment, and in doing so the university became totally, we think, independent of ruler or religion, and facts became the standard replacing ideology. And the modern university can thus be viewed as the result of a long development. Since the Enlightenment, increasingly the dominance of worldviews was left behind. Instead, the university focused on assembling facts, which together with the theoretical framework constitute a growing body of knowledge. And maybe we went too far with that. Also from within the university at these times, there's criticism that the modern university is too much knowledge-driven and too often stops at gathering only facts and producing technology. Of course, in itself, the latter is fine, and the scientific and cultural meaning of this is immense. But if the university stops there, only assembling facts, it's prone to lead to a disconnect with society. A disconnect because the university is then too far away from the prevailing worldviews to be able to connect to them successfully. A disconnect, by the way, which is made worse because of the continuously more specialized nature of the disciplines, which is natural and universal development as a response to intense global competition, but it leads to a university which is technocratic and too specialized, a university which is no longer maybe able to speak the language of the street, too far maybe away from society, maybe not adequately solving societal problems. And I think there is evidence in this landscape of the so-called post-truth society that the university is increasingly ineffective in convincing society of scientific truth. The worldwide debates around vaccination programs provide a convincing example. For the academia, for doctors and scientists, the scientific truth is indisputable. That is that vaccination is effective and necessary. But under the attack of the no-vax movement, for example, the Italian government now reconsiders the national vaccination policy because, as an Italian member of parliament said, politicians don't accept orders, we don't accept orders from scientists. The Italian health minister demonstrated her disbelief in science by stating that death through measles are unavoidable. Clearly, science is here not able to convincingly contextualize the scientific proof of the effectiveness and urgency of vaccination. Climate change provides another illustrative example of the mismatch between science and society. The academic community, I'm from the climate sciences, the academic community is convinced that there is irrefutable evidence for man-induced climate change, but finds that some governments, even governments or presidents, are manipulating or ignoring facts when stating that anthropogenic factors are not proven or even that these don't play a role. The burning question today is why disbelievers of scientific facts are so successful. In his book, Post-Truth, 2018, McIntyre rightly points out that the success of social media is the very basis for the erosion of the concept of collective truth as related to facts and clear observation. Social media provide platforms for people who are thinking alike and are there in the position to select the facts they most like to become their truth without being challenged. For many, social media symbolize the individualization of society. People don't want to hear what is true, but want to decide what their truth is, gladly accepting that they are living in a bubble constructed by the assembly of only people who think alike. But if the university is not able and willing to connect to these bubbles, it is inevitable that its position in society will be marginalized. And certainly in academic circles, it is accepted to complain about politics and to speak about the Brexit or the election of the American President Trump as a result of stupidness or of people being ill-informed. It would be much better if we would view the landscape around us as a result of an intricate interplay of a dissatisfied electorate which is fed up with the continuous streams of so-called truth from governments, but maybe also from academia, outlining what they should or should not do. In reaction, they regain their self-esteem by functioning in a bubble of self-elected composition and thus ignoring inconvenient truth. As such, and quoting Baghini, very interesting booklet in 2018, the post-truth society is in part a result of a malfunctioning of the social system of knowledge. By retreating into bubbles of the like-minded, people can strip out a lot of inconvenient complexities. A wider perspective would give, and leading to a simpler but therefore also distorted network of belief. And it is precisely therefore that universities should be much more prominently visible, much more seeking connection to the bubbles of these distorted networks of belief, just like Louise pointed out in her first contribution. But where does that leave the university? Where does that leave us? What should be our strategy? Already more than a decade ago, in particular funders realized that universities can only successfully connect to society and prevailing worldviews if they really address societal challenges. The EU programs built around grand societal challenges form a good example of this, followed by many national funding agencies asking for more attention to impact. In turn, this fueled the ideas of the university transforming in a civic university, I think Luc mentioned that, being visible in society and working at solving societal issues. But in practical terms, this means that on the one hand, universities are faced with the problem that they need to be specialized and knowledge-driven in order to be successful. Blue sky research is important, and they need to break through disciplinary boundaries. But on the other hand, they need to stay in touch with society, they need to address multidisciplinary societal problems. I think that to facilitate both, the university needs to realize a matrix structure in which the classical specialist nature of the university is respected. But at the same time, the specialist silos are connected at relevant levels. And one way to do it, and we did this in Utrecht University and still believe in it, although many people complained about spending the money in that way, is building large-scale interdisciplinary programs overlaying the disciplinary foundation. In such programs we can arrive at a deep integration of sciences, social sciences, humanities, technology, but more important, at bringing scientific results effectively in the societal domain. This means, however, that the university and research funders should profoundly revise their strategies, investing much more in multi- and interdisciplinary research and in bringing their results to society, not only to the market in the form of new technologies. That's important, but it's also not enough. We need also to bring the results to society in terms of more actively positioning our research outcomes in the landscape of public policy, including in pointing out what the consequences are of ignoring facts. We should stand up. We should speak out when facts are ignored, and we should explain what the implication is of our findings. In conclusion, the university, I think, needs to bring facts in the domain of truth by providing context. Facts alone are not enough. We need to bring them in a context and, if necessary, even have a moral judgment, preferably by engaging into public debate. And by doing so, the universities are not only seekers of truth, but are actively contributing to the process of developing and maintaining a collective truth, which is the very fundament of each democratic state. Letting go of that principle is the end of the university, but maybe also the end of the orderly state. And to finish my talk, I quote Iron Burma. I've put these quotes on screen, who warned, "Read the signs of the times." And Timothy Snyder, who wrote, "Believe in truth. To abandon facts is to abandon freedom." So yes, the university should search for facts, but it should also passionately search for the truth. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have now about 20 minutes to discussion. Please, your questions or remarks to our panelists. Please, Professor Konvalinka.
Okay, there will be a number of questions to all the speakers, all very exciting. I would just choose Luc Sels to start off. In your first slide, just a comment and the question. The comment is that in your first introductory slide you show these beautiful examples of technology successes in your universities. On the upper part of the slide, there was a compound called Viriat, which is the most active compound against HIV. I just wanted to mention that this compound has been jointly discovered by Eric de Klerk from Leuven and by Antonin Holin from Prague. So that was yet another example of a very successful trans-European cooperation of our universities, even back in the 80s, and this cooperation goes on. So that was a commentary. The question is, you asked this important question whether this transition from university as a church of wisdom to university as an engine for success and engine for technology, whether that's driven by government or by universities. My personal experience is that it's also, and increasingly so, driven by students. My students, like 15 years ago, wanted to get the Nobel Prize. Number of them now want to become Steve Jobs. They really want to change the world differently. They want to create their own companies and become independent. Is it something that you see as well? And is it something we should be afraid of, or is it something we should use? That's my question.
I think, I don't know, the microphone is on, you all hear me. Yeah. I tend to agree with your statement. I think that government is a very important driver. Students today are also, but I think we are referring to different times. When I look at we were an early adopter in technology transfer. We started in 1972 in KU Leuven, and if you look at the Reuters ranking, all the universities that are, let's say, leading the pack, were all early adopters. So there's a lot of path dependency in that game, and in becoming strong takes a lot of time. And I think that one of the major changes that we experienced was were a few governments, Flemish governments in the 1980s especially, who started to support this system. Yeah, so I think if we refer to the 80s and the early 90s, then definitely government was a very important partner in that change towards, well, becoming an engine of economic development and competitiveness. If we look at more, let's say, modern times and the more recent years, then the push and the drive within the institution, and now I'm talking about KU Leuven, definitely comes from the students. And that's actually the group that we have forgotten for far too long. We have these beautiful technology transfer offices supporting our academics and the researchers, but much of the, let's say, new entrepreneurial endeavors come from the student body. That's why we now, I think 5 years ago, Koen de Bakker and myself, so the managing director and myself, initiated the Leuven Community for Innovation-Driven Entrepreneurship, which is actually a tech transfer and incubator office for students. Yeah. And you're right in saying that their professional orientation has changed, so they are far more entrepreneurial and innovation-oriented, especially in science and technology, but also in the biomedical sciences. But they do need the support and the signal from the university that what they try to do is valued and is supported. So, again, I think you're completely right, but we are focusing on different eras. Yeah, that's okay.
Yes, thank you very much. I have a question to Professors Richardson and Professor van der Zwaan about freedom, liberty on the one hand and truth on the other, and the necessary sort of connection between the two, and I fully share what you said. The question is the following. What about political correctness, especially in the humanities and in the social sciences, especially on the other side of the Atlantic? That's true, not so much on this side, but on universities there, concerning this question of political correctness, on universities themselves making a big mistake in not really accepting all including false or false assertions or falseness. Thank you.
Well, I think any university that doesn't accept all views, the expression of all views, is failing. Irrespective, in the UK, we have, on the one hand, the government legislation insisting that we, counter-terrorist legislation, not permit the expression of extremist speech. And on the other, there are indeed students who do not want to hear views that are antithetical to their own. The arguments against them both are identical, and I think universities have to maintain consistent arguments and permit all legal speech. To me, the only constraint on speech on university campuses should be its legality, irrespective of whether it's coming from the government, from the left, from the right, or any place else.
Maybe my answer is coming from a little bit different direction, but I think that universities, faculty, universities leaders are not aware enough of what's going on in society to some extent. Of course, we all know what's going on. We read the papers, we look at television, we know exactly what's politically correct or not. But most of my colleagues view at society as if society is wrong, society is stupid, Trump is an idiot. Brexit is a case of misleading people, is a case of false policies. Might all be true, but one of the deeper reasons is that we are not able to connect to these worldviews. Trump is not wanting to hear what universities bring. So, whether it's politically correct or not, I think that this disconnect between society is not only to be blamed on society, but it's also a problem for the university. Because we try to belittle the problem, we think that the complaints from society are not justified, and I think that we need to listen more carefully and bring what universities have to bring in a better way, and contextualize that in a better way, so that indeed, as Luc, I think, pointed out, that society thinks universities as important and valuable contributions to society for which they are prepared to pay for. And I don't know about Czechia, or I don't know about other countries, but I think in the Netherlands there is a kind of balance which I'm afraid which is going rapidly towards the point that in politics there is no belief anymore in universities. Of course, there is a belief in universities as an engine of economy. There is a belief in the university as an enormously important educating machine, but the university is not viewed as an active player in the political landscape. And I think something is wrong there. And so we stop at giving a lot of facts, but we need to take an additional step and try to contextualize these facts in the truth as prevailing in society, which is maybe not our truth. But what's going on is that it's collective truth, which has been very important in stable democracies, is now disintegrating and fragmenting. And we are not doing enough in trying to restore that. So from that point of view, maybe I didn't answer your question completely, but political correctness, it goes further than that, I think.
Bert, can I pick you up on that? Michael Hengartner, president of Univerzita. I have a problem with something called a collective truth or an individual truth. Truth would have to have an absolute thing. But I think if I can reinterpret what you're trying to say is that facts need to be interpreted, needs to be, as you said, contextualized. And what we're lacking is the ability to jointly agree to what these facts mean to our society in our current social environment. And it's this discussion that lacks often, that we throw the facts and we think, yeah, of course you understand what you mean, because I know what they mean and you will have the same logical conclusion than I do. And it's this discussion which, of course, then is at the social level that is essential, and that's where the social science and humanities come back in, because that's exactly what they're good at, is to be critical, reflective about taking something and trying to contextualize it. And maybe we should also say that's why having these areas in a university is absolutely essential, because just with facts we will not get anywhere.
I totally agree. I don't want to start a debate about absolute truth. As a simple scientist, I drowned in the debate on is there an absolute truth, but I think that we totally agree, and I think that especially the social science and humanities should play a really active role here. So my plea is that these people from the humanities and social sciences should stop with complaining, but should start the work. And here is a lot of work to be done and a lot of good research to be delivered.
I can see the other
yes,
questions.
hello, I'm Caroline Pauws from the Free University of Brussels. I'm sitting here. And I want to follow up. I first of all want to thank you for all the presentations, and I think they're interconnected and sometimes a bit of contradictory as well, which is good. But I want to talk about university as we are talking about legacy of democracy. Are we an engine as universities for democracy? But I might be wrong. I thought that in the UK, young people, even those with a diploma, didn't vote were not actually voting in the Brexit. So young people were not taking their collective responsibility. And did we fail on them as university? How do we get them to vote? We just had elections in Belgium over the weekend. And many of the young people, again, didn't vote. So we don't have this democratic debate in our universities. And so this is the first thing. How do we connect our students to democracy? And then fact-based democracy, so we talk about history and so on. And the second one, and this is in the UNICA network, and this is an experience that was shared by other rectors as well. Talking to my colleague from Madrid, he talked that he is a Catalan, he's rector of the university in Madrid. He was not able to organize a debate on the Catalan question in his university. So it is not even political correctness, was just not able to have this discussion in Flanders. It's not easy to have a debate, not on our campus at least, with one elected politician, a state secretary who is perhaps, he's not in my view very harsh on migration, but he has some harsh words on migration. So also our students opposed this kind of debate. So I had to, and I'm afraid that the university has a free space of debate, and connecting to our student citizens is very difficult for the moment. And I feel it myself as a personal failure.
One more.
Could I reply to that for very briefly? The first part of your question is: are universities really able to convince students that they should go to participate in voting and being a good citizen? The answer is no. I think that we have really focused a lot on Earth Sciences 001 in my case, and not a lot about what we now like to call in the Netherlands Bildung. I think that universities should do a better job there. I really think that part of the disinterest in the process of democracy is starting at the university and even before, but the university at least should be a place where students start to realize that they should play a role there. And that's connected to my second answer. As rector, which I'm now happily not anymore to decide on this type of problem, I always let any debate go. Whatever politics, whatever the implication, and there are limits. I do realize that, and Louise outlined one of the limits by law, but there are some limits of just simple decency and other things. But basically, I think that if a director of Complutense University in Madrid wants to talk about the Catalan thing, he should be able to. And if that's not the case, then universities should stand up and speak out, because I think it is absolutely serious. If the Catalan problem prevents having a debate on the legitimacy of any Catalan wish, it might be a ridiculous wish, I don't care. So that I think that also in the Dutch or Belgian situation, we should fight for this freedom to have more debate. And then in itself, the interest in voting will come. I'm sure of that.
Please.
So, I have a question.
Just a moment, please.
No, just a very brief additional comment. We invited Puigdemont on 3 different occasions to speak for the students. The problem is that he only attracts the believers and not the, let's say, the opposition among the students. So there's still, well, the debate is still lacking. And I think, Caroline, that we are actually, I don't know about other countries and regions, but in Flanders we are overly focused on immersion of students in their discipline for 4 or 5 years, and they stay within the walls of that discipline. And the focus on, let's say, a broad immersion in very simple principles of citizenship, civil responsibility, integrity, and I can continue with a few other very powerful but also expensive words. That's, I think, the domain where we are failing right now.
Jan Darlif, I am the Vice Dean of the Faculty of Mathematics. I would like to go back to the local setting. We've heard this very nice lecture of Dr. Pithart on the two great minds, great Czech minds, Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk, that's on the portrait behind you, the first president, a person of great popularity and integrity, and Josef Pekář, a very famous historian, probably the best historian in the first half of the century in this country. They both kind of achieved, they were famous, but it seems now that maybe there was Václav Havel, which was a similar story, that there was a great person of great integrity that really achieved a big thing here. But now we see something else. We see that, as you've heard, there's this manipulation of the public space, these people living in bubbles, spreading fake news and so on. We still have these great minds, but they are not so visible. And I think we didn't mention here that these fake news are not coming out of small bubbles, but they're also supported. We have these troll farms in St. Petersburg or in Shanghai. This is well known. So there's some power behind. So what should we do here in a small country like Czech Republic? Shall we try to build these anti-troll farms with the help of the European Union? Shall we try to find these great minds of the caliber of Masaryk, Pekář or Havel and invite them to the universities, make them visible, or both, or something else? That's my question.
Give some advice.
Even if one of these messages from a troll farm is shown to be incorrect, we are doing good work. So a small country, large country, doesn't matter. I think that the idea of universities picking up and trying to do fact-checking where they can. They are not fact-checkers, but they need to contribute to the truth. Whether that's dependent on having great minds, I don't know, but I think that university leaders should feel their responsibility there. And it can't be that we leave this whole distortion of the truth going by without any action from the university. On the other hand, what I see in society is really very encouraging. The free press is doing better. Certainly in the United States, where the free press is in the up as response to President Trump, so he did something good there. But in the end, we need to mobilize forces in society, and to some extent, Caroline said it already. The university has a job there in educating students that they should play a role.
Maybe in addition to that, let's not forget the collective dimension, because we are now referring to great minds and individual people standing up and speaking up. But what we need to do better in our universities, I believe, is to bring people from different disciplines together in debates on the themes that matter today. I think one of the best investments that we did in Leuven is establishing Metaforum, which is the forum for interdisciplinary debate. It's not a research, it's debate between academics, and they write collective statements on societal themes, and that's where you start making a difference in the long term on topics like radicalization or migration or climate change and whatever.
Thank you. The last question, please.
Jürgen Barkov, Trinity College Dublin and Coimbra Group Executive Board. One message that's coming very strongly from the panel, and I think we all agree, is that we must become more engaged with public debate, and that we must sort of step out of our bubbles and help down breaking other bubbles. My question is, how do we do that? What can we do practically? Because I think a couple of things must come together, and the first one, I think, is one that we as individual scholars need to address. I'm from the humanities, and certainly in the humanities for far too long there has been a tendency to delight in hermetic language, to be proud of not being understood by a wider public or by colleagues outside of our disciplines. I think this is something we have to fight, and we have to train our students and our young scholars to be very good at their discipline, but also be very good at saying why what we do is important and what impact it has in wider, in non-academic contexts. And I think as institutions, we must incentivize this kind of engagement. Being able to sort of reach a wider public, get involved in broader media and so on, must be something that university leadership acknowledge in promotion criteria, that it's not just the latest sophistication in our very specialized disciplines, but also engaging broader. And then I think we need to develop institutional mechanisms for this broader debate. Rector Sells just mentioned an example. In my own university, the Humanities Research Institute has organized Behind the Headlines talks where we bring the expertise of certain disciplines to address a wider topic, but in partnership with media, in partnership with NGOs, in partnership with also political institutions. And I think seeking these partnerships much more than we have done in the past is an absolute imperative if we want to achieve that. So I'd be interested in sort of what the panel sees as sort of the right ways of achieving this greater impact that I think we all agree we must achieve.
Well, I already mentioned one example in our university. What we are developing currently in collaboration with some of the partner universities is student-level think tanks, but guided and supervised by faculty. To at least, that does not mean that they speak a language and will end with a language that everyone understands. That's something different, but being able to understand each other and to open the doors towards the other disciplines, because the think tanks are interdisciplinary in nature. And I do believe that if we start implementing those models in our student body and at undergraduate level, that we may have an impact in the long term, maybe even in society, who knows?
I of course agree on the importance of interdisciplinarity. I'd be amazed if there was anybody in this room who would take a position against interdisciplinarity. But what I think, if we want to have credibility in the public eye, we have to have much more diversity in ideological perspectives within universities. Part of the reason I think we're not trusted is that we are seen, in the words of one state senator in Michigan, a basket of liberal crazies. I think we need to not just host debate from people outside our institutions, but we need to demonstrate that we respect all ideological perspectives within our own institutions. And I think we should hold far more debates of people with different perspectives within our institutions, where we demonstrate to our students how you respond to somebody whose views you find objectionable. How do you demonstrate and in fact feel respect for someone with whom you deeply disagree? Because while I absolutely agree that we need to be a fact checker and so on, our legitimacy as a fact checker won't be accepted unless our standards of scholarship are uncompromising and unless we're seen as being open to different ideological perspectives.
Maybe two brief remarks, if I may. You said things about humanities I never would dare to say, so thank you for that. I think that indeed you are hitting the nail on the head. In my university, the reward system was really not towards participating in societal debate. So the reward system, we changed this system that also not only for a Nature paper or whatever you could be promoted, but also when you play a visible role in debates and indeed having credibility when you speak about things based on excellent scholarship, but then taking the time out of writing papers and going into society. And that needs additional reward, I think.
Thank you, our speakers. Thank you for a very interesting discussion. See you tomorrow at 9.
Organization remarks.
Excuse me, see you tonight, because there is a dinner at 7, and those